very kind to me during this week, which I had a terrific days. I've been supported, as Larry said, by the Ministry of Culture of Argentina, and I thank them as well. Well, I wanted to show you the process of getting into my latest book, sorry if my English is not perfect, maybe I mistake some word or forget.
It's better than most Americans, I should say.
Okay. Good to hear that.
Yeah.
I wanted to show you briefly, as a sort of introduction, how I got into my latest book. During several years, I've been working on short stories all around the autobiographical concept, but I never got into a book. There were 4 pages, 8 pages at the most, and they were all around what I called around the concept that I wanted to work with was that I wanted to escape from the autobiographical, where a person, for example, wakes up in the morning and then checks his emails and then has some thought and then goes back to sleep. You know? I wanted to go to another part, to another direction, and all these short stories have been published in many magazines, especially independent ones over there in Argentina. I studied under a great Argentinian master who was called Alberto Breccia. His work is incredible and he was a great teacher, and when he died in the beginning of the 90s, the group continued together publishing our own works in our own magazine. Because by the 90s in Argentina we had a very fierce neoliberal government who did very awful things to our culture, and there was no comic scene at all. There was nothing where you could publish. So we had previously had a golden age of comics in the 50s, 60s. Then by the 70s and 80s it began to slow down, and by the 90s there was nothing. So the consequence of having no places to publish was, well, we decided to have our own magazine. And so I did a lot of short stories around that time for those magazines until I reached my first book, which is called Llegar a los 30. It's something like Reaching 30. It was with not so many pages as Growing Up in Public. It was 52 pages. But I didn't know exactly by the time I began doing it, how long would it be. Maybe it was like 10, 12, and then it began to grow and began to grow. So I reached the 52 pages. And it was published there in Argentina like 10 years ago, something like that. This was made, maybe we can tell it here, but it was completely drawn in pencil, as I did with my latest book, Growing Up in Public. I did completely in pencil. I won't work with pencil anymore because it was like a headache. It had to be very, very tidy or very clean, everything, no? Because pencil, you can erase it or you can, how do you say, blur it. Yeah.
Smudge.
Yeah, that. So, well, that was my first book, and that's where after that one, the Growing Up in Public concept, let's say, began. I call it a concept because I did it in several, I worked this idea in several formats. At first they invited me in an anthology in Chile to participate with other Latin American artists, and they said, well, the format of the book, it will be square. And that's what they gave me the idea to work in the square format. All the pages in the book were worked in that size. And for me it was here are some original pages which are bigger than the Argentine edition and the US edition. It was, I understand, of course, that doing a book like this, it would have been very expensive and huge. But the format for me was a possibility of expanding the drawing. No? It gave me a lot of liberty in that sense. And so by that time I published, I believe, 6 pages in that anthology in Chile. And so I got hooked with that and continued working with more pages, which then turned into the book. The concept, the title of the book comes from the Lou Reed album, Growing Up in Public. I sort of stole it. Because I like the cover, no? The photograph is like a very honest photograph. It seems like he's just walking up or something like that, and it's very honest, I think. And that format, I'm telling you about that different, the book took different spaces. For example, at one time in Buenos Aires, I did an exhibition in a tunnel which used to hold art installments. So I painted, they had like, the walls had some part which were like panels. And so I painted in the whole of the tunnel which crossed underneath the street. And I painted the story, many of the drawings which also then turned into the book. For that exhibition also, I did a catalog, which is this one, and it was handed for free to the people who came to the exhibition. And I did another story especially for the catalog. Well, the concept began to grow and to take some other short stories which were published in some other magazines, until I reached the book, the final edition, at first the Argentine edition. And again, I didn't know how much would it take me, how many pages, so I began to draw and to draw and to draw, until they grew up into up to 112 pages. There are several topics, excuse me, around the book. One of the main topics or the main subjects which are all over the pages of the book is the presence of the city of Buenos Aires. Because I love Buenos Aires very much. Of course, I don't have to go downtown every day to work, so maybe I can love the city from another point of view. No? And I try to put that in the pages of the book, no? Through those big drawings which show the buildings and the architecture of Buenos Aires, which is, by the way, getting brought down a lot. A lot of the beautiful houses from the past are being destroyed, which I believe happens here as well, no? I've been told. But anyway, Buenos Aires still has a very huge identity. So I wanted to show, well, as I said, all the buildings, all the factories and very big warehouse and companies which are in the greater Buenos Aires area, which is the suburbs, as well as the parks and the very old trees, ancient trees which are in Buenos Aires. Of course, I'm showing you these pages not in a chronological order of the book because I thought it would be mostly boring. So I'm jumping from one part to the other. These are like those new constructions I'm telling you about. In a very nice neighborhood and very ancient neighborhood in Buenos Aires, which was incredible, and it had houses 100 years old and they disappeared just like that. And there is a big market, a big fruit market, who used to be in the center of the city. This place still exists, but now it's a shopping mall. So I wanted to also show the city through its past, through what had happened in the past. Like in this example, but also there are some places which were cinema buildings. in Buenos Aires. Most of them, they still exist, but there are other things now. One is a church, the other one is a disco, the other one is an appliance store, or they hold tango shows for tourists. And for me, it's very nostalgic because in those places I used to watch movies in my childhood and adolescence, such as Back to the Future or Stand By Me, a lot of other very influential movies. I love cinema very much now as well. And the past also comes in the book in the way of memories or flashbacks, which had to do with my grandparents, for example. We in Argentina have had a big immigration after World War I of Italian and Spanish people. We are mostly conformed by them. We have an Indian component, but well, as in everywhere, they killed all the Indians by the late 20th century, so now there are only very small communities. But I have, for example, a great-grandmother who was Guarani, of the Indians, Guarani, and my grandmother from the other part of the family is Italian. So my grandfather built his house in a moment when there was nothing in that neighborhood. It was in the greater Buenos Aires. It was like land and land and land, and he built his house there in the 50s. And I believe they sort of like built the nation, that generation, no? With their hands and with that Italian and Spanish component, like formed our character nowadays. We have that very explosive character and Latin, and we also have very good pizza and pasta places. So I tried to recreate my grandfather's house from photographs, which I took from a piece from here, another piece from there. In that house, I began to listen to music, which is another topic very present in the book. I used to go there when I was 14, 15. My grandparents were away at the work, at their shops, and there were a lot of LP records in the living room, which belonged to my grandmother and my uncle. To my mother and my uncle. And I began there to listen to the Beatles, Paul McCartney, and a lot of stuff like that. And maybe you can see that all that stuff which I wanted to show, I didn't want to recreate them. For example, the LP covers, or here in this example, these are movie programs that my mother had kept from when I was a child. One of these is when the first time I went to the movies, I went to see Tom and Jerry compilation or cartoons when I was 4 years old. And I wanted to show them, in the original pages I put them in color, as a sort of like respect that documentation, no? In a very documentary way. Then neither of the editions could we maintain that color, but again, I mean it was not that important as well, because there are like 10 pages in 100 which only have very few fragments of color. The maps as well, or there is a part in the book where I tell the story of an eviction in Buenos Aires where people got kicked out from a cultural center. And I didn't want to recreate that. I wanted to show it just as the television had transmitted it. And because that was part of my it is, of course, part of my everyday life. In fact, this eviction took place just a block away or two from where I was living by that time. I was going to a meeting and I passed right through it. I wanted especially to keep that documentary stuff. Of course, throughout the book there are some political and social references. Many of them take place like in the walls. You can see them draw in the, like painted in a graffiti way all over the walls. For me, it was like having another layer of information, telling like another story. The characters go walking, and you could see other things written there apart from what they are talking about. Well, there are many social and political references. Of course, I'm not show Sacco, but it was like just little details. Also, some gated communities where people, like the close neighborhoods where the people tend to live nowadays a lot because they feel more secure. Well, the book is like a huge consideration or thought about everything. For me, autobiography is like just an excuse. Could be another character, but for me it was like simpler and easier to do it like that. There are many pages which deal with topics around the contemporary art or the visual arts in general. I talk about the grants. Well, I make a critic on the grants and funds, and then they gave me one to get here. No? But also the manners in which the contemporary art are worked nowadays, in which they make like a bunch of stuff and they pile it over in a corner, and that's art, no? Which is okay. I'm not a narrow-minded who wants art to be only figurative. But come on, well, all of those things were done by Duchamp like 100 years ago. And also the work of some other painters which I admire a lot. They appear throughout the book, sort as an homage, it's an homage to them. There is one moment when I said, well, when I thought that this character's story could be too much, could be like boring at a point. My initial concept was that maybe not, I didn't have to tell everything just as it happened in my life. It didn't function. I thought it was boring. So I had to recreate, invent, add, or take out a lot of things, and maybe distort them from how they happen really. But anyway, beyond that, which for me it was like getting at I needed to reach an artistic veracity or truth, which functioned in itself. But anyway, I thought that I had to break that story at one point. And I decided, because it's a book I love a lot, which is Moby Dick by Melville, and I decided to include a part of the book. In fact, it's like a story inside the Moby Dick story, which is the story about Jonah and the whale. And I put it like, well, the character is walking around, he's waiting for a bus stop, at the bus stop, and then he's reading, and he hears like something coming from a church, and he enters, and that's where the priest begins with his reading. And I try to maintain exactly the text by Melville, no? So as to respect it, without shortening it, without changing words. I tried to do it. We tried to do it at the best. We changed like very little, a few words, but for me it was important to do that, to be truthful, and to also like, in a way, I like to maintain like there is a tradition in Argentina of literary adaptations, most done by my master Alberto Breccia. He adapted Edgar Allan Poe and Lovecraft, Borges, well, a lot of writers, and they were all visually stunning, no? And I think nowadays the literary adaptations are like at least in my country, too formal, too classical. Like they don't have poetry, or they don't have. They're not graphically interesting. So I wanted to do something with that, which escaped from the classical narration. So well, at the end, the character goes and lays in the bed, and at the next page he wakes up, and we don't know if it was a dream or what. I laid it like. Well, another topic very important in the book are the music that I talked to you about, and the love relationships. The book is sort of like the love story of my wife and I before we met. It ends just before we are about to be a couple. But by that time, I was like, well, very doubtful, and you go with a girl, and then you're thinking of another girl, and you don't know if, well, all the doubts we all have in life. And again, the music is very present throughout the band, which is called Los Auténticos Decadentes. It's a band we are very huge fans of. And I sort of did like a chronicle of a concert, because live they are like very impressive. There are 12 guys on the stage, and they are very funny, and the music is explosive, and everyone knows the lyrics of the songs. So I wanted to do just like a review, but drawn. You know? And again, then I tried to kiss my character tried to kiss the girl, but well, it happened like this in real life. So I began wondering, does it matter if I tell it like something different? It was not after that concert, but doesn't really matter. But for the story, for me, it was okay. It had to be in that point of the story. Well, there are like many relationships throughout the book, several. And another topic which served me to break that everyday life are the dreams. I put a lot of dreams in the book. One of them is based upon the song "Ballad of a Thin Man" by Bob Dylan. I tried to do like an adaptation of the song in drawings, and in the end, the character meets his master, Alberto Breccia. He shows him what he's doing, and he's like, he doesn't give him his approval, but then in the end, he does. So, to enter the final part of the presentation, I'd like to mention a couple of things regarding the US edition, and how we changed some things and why we did it. At first, there is a big, nowadays no, but a couple of years ago, we had in Buenos Aires a very big comics festival, which was called Comicopolis. We held it like for 3 years, and then the new administration like destroyed it. Well, they don't want to hold it anymore, unfortunately. And in that comic festival, there were several meetings with editors from other countries, and that was where I met Gary for the first time. I went with my editor and with a colleague. We saw several publishers, one from Italy with, I don't remember his name, one from Spain, one from France. So we had those meetings. We talked to Gary. He was like very, he listened. I talked a lot because maybe he was the one of the three which spoke better English, so I was nervous, I talked a lot, showing my book and the other books, and he said, well, it's okay, very nice, he liked them a lot. So well, that was okay for that time. We left, everyone happy. So like 3 months later, I received a mail from Gary, an email. He said, do you remember me? Yeah, of course I remember you. I was waiting for your email, I was thinking. No? Well, and he said that Fantagraphics was interested in publishing my book, but of course he didn't understand, he doesn't understand Spanish, so the first thing was to make a translation. I studied English up to proficiency, up to when you are a professor for Spanish people, of course. So I could manage and did the first translation by myself. And we did like a very rough version of that. It's not that I immediately began working on the final version. Just putting the text all over, very roughly, for example, over some parts, just for him or for the people at Fantagraphics to understand. And that's when we began working with Michael, with Archie and Michael would send me, well, maybe you can see here, but these are like the Word files, and he would send me with very tidy and order, with, for example, from page 1 to 12, from page 13 to page 40. And we had a very nice job all the time and constantly recommending me things to change or suggestions, which of course I said, well, for me it's okay, or maybe if I was uncomfortable with something, I could tell him, and Michael said it's okay, no problem. So it was a very kind and friendly work, which I thank a lot. And we arrived at several issues that we had to decide. For example, there are a lot, as I said, there are a lot of Spanish lyrics from music from Argentine bands all around the book, including Los Auténticos Decadentes. And I preferred that they were kept in Spanish, sort of to maintain the poetry of the words, no? And we did it, and in the end, we included like the translation of all the songs, so as to include as many readers as we could, no? I thought that was very useful. And all around the book there are several, as I mentioned earlier as well, political and social references, which we included in footnotes. Maybe you can see it here, but it's here. For example, in this part, the girl speaks about the government, about Macri, who is by that time he was our mayor, and now unfortunately he's our president. Well, there is a passage also where Videla, the dictator Videla, appears, and we mentioned that in a footnote because there is a press conference by Videla, which is pretty shocking, and he calls, well, the whole government of the dictatorship call themselves a process. We are a process. Of course, they wouldn't call themselves a dictatorship, but he said we are the process, to another thing which we didn't know what it was. Here are also some footnotes, and in this eviction part, Michael found the exact word for the people who work in the streets, like picking up the paper and selling it, which are, we call them cartoneros, and it's the cardboard people. And not only the footnotes are political or social, but also the traditions, some Argentine traditions, such as here we have a ritual which is like a tea, but it's called a mate. And I try to draw it in every step of it. At first you put the water to boil, then you fill in with the herbs, with the yerba, then you wait for the water, then you put a little water in the yerba, then you place the bombilla, which is the instrument to drink it. So it's a sort of tradition which we mentioned over there. Another thing which I had to do was re-letter some parts, and especially the letters which were like part of the drawing, no? Which were included somewhere over there, not just in a balloon or in a square of text. So I drew that a lot, those letters, I also did some drawings again. For example, there was a part, there was a lyric by Madonna, and she didn't allow us to use the lyric, so I had to erase all that part, and then drew again, like the frames, that stuff. And there was one page which I did almost completely, because it was a page where the character searches in Google for some information, and in the Argentine edition you could read the searches results. But it was hard for me to, shall I translate the results or leave them in Spanish? So well, the thing we decided to do was put it in the drawings, like the character gets like some sort of words and characters appear from the computer. It was like more striking visually. This you will not see because you can see it very well. But the final step of that was which font would we use throughout the book. I had 3 fonts made from my own typewriting. I did digitally. And when we decided on the one which was nearer to my calligraphy, which is this one. Well, okay. And the last step was the cover. This is the Argentine edition, which I did like a big drawing, which goes from the cover to the back part. No, and it was, of course, very crowded, very full of details, full of all the characters which appear in the book. And when I began working with another person, Michael Jacq, which I believe he's not anymore at Fantagraphics, but he was very kind also. He gave me a lot of ideas, and he said that probably the best thing would be to have very little elements, which could be interesting for a possible American reader when he looks for it in the library, in the bookstore, or at a window display. That's right. Thank you. So we began to work with several ideas. I did some sketches. There are several ideas. It was inspired in a book which contains the whole complete lyrics by